I'm Martin Rust. I'm with the Security and Policy Institute of Professional Development here at the University of Ottawa. My guest this afternoon is Philippe Lagassé, Associate Professor here at the University of Ottawa. We've been talking about ISIS and global terrorism and various geopolitical events, and I want to ask your opinion in terms of what you think are some of the most important events happening in the world today and maybe some of their implications for Canada.
Well, I'd say if we're looking specifically at Canada, certainly the rise of sectarianism in the wider Middle East is an issue that is of concern to the Canadian government for a variety of reasons. The first one, obviously, as we saw in October of last year, is that it can have impacts here at home, homegrown terrorism and extremism that's influenced or inspired by sectarian movements in that region generally, and how it might affect us here at home. Secondly, the general instability in that region that affects our allies, the United States, Israel, and others, will come and impact our national interests as well. So we have a general interest, and as we always have had since the Second World War, in general global peace and stability. And the biggest source of instability currently today in the world, arguably, is the rise of sectarian violence in the Middle East. Now, we've had a great amount of difficulty trying to deal with that, because fundamentally it is a regional problem that has to be addressed by regional actors. But we as Canadians have to realize that this instability does affect our interests, affects the interests of our allies, and ultimately, if we're going to contribute to a solution to the problem, we need to be involved both in helping local governments, local partners, come to grips with the problem of sectarianism and violent extremism, but also in the short term, providing military and security solutions that allow those regional actors the room that they need to breathe in order to address that problem.
My sense is that this is a different type of conflict, that this is not just something that happens over there, but it very much has issues and implications here as well in our community, and perhaps that's different than what we've seen in certainly my lifetime and probably for a few generations. Would you agree with that, and what some of those forces might be?
Well, we've always had what we would today call transnational movements. So if you look at communism in the early 20th century, was an issue and a movement that found itself, yes, in Russia at the time with the Bolshevik Revolution, and had an impact here at home with the rise of different left-wing movements and that type of impact. The difference today, I would argue, and I think what you're getting at, is the fact that currently now for an individual, or even a small group of individuals, it's far easier today to have a large impact, a large violent impact, than it might have been in the past. And therefore, this is why the spread of these ideologies and these movements, and the spread and ease with which people can cross borders and communicate across borders, makes the rapidity and the impact of their ideology felt across the world and across states and across borders much more significant than in the past.
So turn that around and look at it from the perspective of a Canadian politician or a Canadian policy maker. Someone in government today who touches policy. How aware are we really of the geopolitical environment that we live in, and what are the things we need to consider?
I think we're generally aware of the geopolitical environment that we're in. I think the Canadian government is actually quite good at harnessing the resources that it has, namely Five Eyes intelligence and its own analytic capability to understand world events. The issue for Canada, unfortunately, is, let's admit it, we are something of a secondary power. We don't necessarily have all the instruments of power and influence at our disposal that allows us to make a greater impact. So we are, to some extent, reliant on allies, reliant on regional partners in order to defend ourselves against these threats, and similarly in order to influence events over broad. So we are somewhat of a secondary player. We can contribute and do quite a bit, but we still are not at the forefront of some of these efforts. That being said, we are able to punch above our weight and do what we can, particularly in the military realm and the intelligence realm. But I would say the biggest challenge facing decision makers here in Ottawa is the fact that we know a lot, but there's very little that we can always do to be able to thwart threats or to be able to address them.
To thwart threats, address them, and even really to communicate about them with the broader public and the broader general population?
Well, I would say that that's a very good point, because one of the largest issues facing policymakers today, I would argue, is Canadians simply, even after the attacks of October, do not necessarily feel that this is a threat that affects them. It is not, and even larger threats such as cyber threats, the rise of other powers, global economic instability. It's difficult and for Canadians every day to see that affecting their daily lives. And on account of that, this has been a long-standing Canadian tradition that it's difficult to mobilize people to come to grips with the security reality that they face. And so as a result, it's difficult to garner support for policies that are meant to address them effectively.
Yeah. Well, these are issues that we're going to be dealing with here at the Institute on an ongoing basis. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
My name is Martin Rust. I'm with the Security and Policy Institute of Professional Development here at the University of Ottawa. My guest today is Phil Lagassé, Associate Professor of Public and International Affairs here at the University of Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you.